even though the soul is birthless and deathless. And that's the second point of, or principle of ignorance. And then because one forgets their real identity as an eternal soul, they think I'm this temporary body. Then they develop a sense of fear of death. This leads to anger after frustration. It's the third type of ignorance that keeps people stuck in the material world and convinces them that suffering is just part of life. Then, this anger after frustration, we had a longer discussion of that. And the origin of that is the appearance of Lord Shiva in his 11 forms as Rudra. What are those 11 forms? Anger is manifested beginning from the heart, and then it's manifested through the senses, and then through the air of life, and then the sky, the air, the fire, the water, the earth, the sun, the moon, and ultimately austerity. Anger is manifests beginning in the heart, and then the senses, the air of life, the sky, the air, the fire, water, earth, sun, moon, and austerity. Now I'm going to explain this in depth now. Now, the origin of Lord Shiva's appearance in the material world is through the anger of Lord Brahma, who became angry that his sons, the Kumaras, refused to grow up and have children, get married and have children, because Brahma needed to populate the universe with living entities. So he wanted his sons to do that, and they refused. They said, "Dad, we don't want to grow up. We want to remain young boys. We don't want to go through puberty and then develop all kinds of desires." And they refused. They said, "Dad, we don't want to grow up. We want to remain young boys. We don't want to go through puberty and then develop all kinds of desires." And they refused. They said, "Dad, we don't want to grow up. We want to remain young boys. We don't want to go through puberty and then develop all kinds of desires." And they refused. They said, "Dad, we don't want to grow up. We want to remain young boys. We don't want to go through puberty and then develop all kinds of desires." Yeah. So, Lord Brahma, using his intelligence, because he's very intelligent, he tried to control his anger. But what happened was it became concentrated in his forehead, and a red spot appeared, and out comes a very angry Lord Shiva. So anger is generated from the mode of passion and tinged with ignorance. And the face of anger is the same whether it's caused by ignorance or knowledge. And this is a very interesting statement. The face of anger looks the same whether it's caused by ignorance or by knowledge. And Brahma tried to curb his anger. He couldn't do so, even though he's the supreme being in the material universe. And the true color of anger is Rudra, which and the color of Rudra is a mixed color of blue that represents ignorance and red that represents passion. And because, therefore, anger is the product of passion and ignorance. So Lord Shiva, after he appears, he begins to cry. And he says to Brahma, he said, "Oh, destiny maker, oh teacher of the universe, kindly tell me my name and place." So Brahma tries to pacify him with gentle words, and he says, "Please don't cry, I shall certainly do as you desire." And then Brahma says to Shiva, "O chief of the demigods, you shall be called by the name Rudra by all people because you have so anxiously cried." So that's he has that name Rudra because he came out crying and upset and angry, actually. And Lord Brahma said, "I already have chosen places for you to reside. You will reside in the heart, in the senses, in the air of life, in the sky, the air, the fire, the water, the earth, the sun, the moon, and austerity." So, Kama esa krota esa raga guna samudbhavam mahasana mahapapma vidi enam ihavairinam. This lust is born from the mode of passion and is transformed into krodha, anger, when the passionate desire, lust is excessively passionate desire for sense gratification. When it's frustrated, it becomes anger. And anger, it destroys things. And thus, lust is the all-powerful enemy of man. So this lust is called kama. So when the lust and hankering or desires are unsatisfied, then krodha appears, anger, which is, as a formidable enemy of the conditioned soul. And the most sinful and horrible type of krodha is represented by the ahankara, or the false ego, and the attitude of thinking that I am the greatest of all. No one is as great as I am. So this egocentric attitude of the conditioned soul is completely under the control of material nature. As soon as we develop these feelings, we're completely controlled by material nature, although we think we're the controller. And one is actually becomes very, very foolish. One is described as a muda, very foolish person. And now the anger develops in the heart, and then it's further manifested through the senses, and then what happens? The eyes become red, the hands and the legs become agitated, and we make a display of, we have reddish eyes, and we make a display by showing our fists, right? You did a good representation yesterday when I asked you. Huh? But how can you dovetail your fists into? You're dovetailing your fists into anger? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, you breathe heavily. So it's represented through the senses, through the air of life. Breathe heavily, and then also, now how is anger represented through the sky? Well, it's represented as a hurricane. The hurricane is Rudra, when the sky becomes overcast with dense clouds and roars in anger. The wind roars in anger. And when the wind blows very fiercely, the Rudra principle is manifested in the sky. And when the seawater is infuriated by the wind, there's a tsunami or there's big waves, and this gloomy feature of the agitated sea, that's again Rudra, or Lord Shiva. It's very fearful. And when fire is ablaze, just like we saw these blazing fires this summer in Canada and in Washington State, it's still going on. Again, that's Rudra in fire. And when there is an inundation over the earth, just like Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, flooded Miami, flooded these different islands in the Caribbean, flooded Texas. Again, this is Lord Shiva. It's a representation of Shiva in one of his Rudra forms. There's 11 Rudra forms. And there are also creatures in material nature that represent Rudra, like the snake, who has fire in his venom. And there's also the tiger and the lion, fire in their teeth, and that represents Lord Shiva. And then the extreme heat of the sun, that represents Lord Shiva, in which people get heat stroke. And then the extreme cold coming from the moon, where people collapse, faint in the cold. And then the austerity of some sages and yogis and philosophers. They exhibit their power through renunciation under the influence of the Rudra principle, like anger and passion, just like Durvasa Muni. So these are all manifestations of Shiva. So Durvasa Muni is a great yogi, but under the influence of the Rudra principle, anger, he picked a quarrel with Maharaj Parikshit, a pretense, and tried to kill him. Maharaj Ambarish, yeah. And then the Brahmana boy who cursed Maharaj Parikshit, that's also the Rudra principle, anger. So when a Rudra principle is exhibited by persons who are not engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the angry person falls down from whatever position they have. Let's say they're very rich or very powerful, they will fall down. So, if we want to control anger, we must control our desires. If we desire only to please Krishna, then it's possible to control anger. But if we desire other things, it becomes impossible to control. And we fall down. And the worst fall down is the Mayavadi falling down from Brahman. That's the worst fire of anger. Okay, so we discussed this yesterday. And anger after frustration. This is even in children. Right? Is that right? Yes. And this is another form of ignorance, the third form of ignorance. And this is explained also. Dukesu anavignas manak, sukesu vigita spriha, vitaragabaya kroda, manmanama, stitadir munir uchyate. One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So we studied this verse yesterday, and the purport. And then, Kama esa kroda esa raga guna samud bhavan. This kroda is coming from passion and ignorance. So this was in the 3rd chapter, 37th verse. The previous verse was 2nd chapter, 26th verse. We studied both of those verses. You see them in your notes. You have your notes? Yeah. And these things happen due to misuse of our free will or our limited independence. If we use our free will correctly, by using our senses and including the mind only in Krishna's service, then we begin to make right choices in life. But if we misuse our free will and use our senses and mind for sense gratification, then our thinking, feeling, and willing becomes clouded, and we make mistakes that put us deeper into entanglement in material nature. So the question is, to be with Krishna or not to be with Krishna? Just like Shakespeare said, to be or not to be, that is the question, right? So, but actually we're adding to be with Krishna or not to be with Krishna. Those are the two choices we have to make at every second in our life. If we continually choose to be with Krishna, then we're protected by Krishna, and he gives us the intelligence to make the right decisions. If we choose not to be with Krishna, then he gives us forgetfulness, and we go deeper into Maya's entanglement. So we should always choose to be with Krishna. Now, the misuse of independence begins the cycle of misery or suffering. And what is the cycle of suffering? You know, Anvita? Well, those are the results of the cycle of suffering. Okay. Say, wait a minute, where's the microphone here? It begins with? Microphone's not working. Microphone died. Okay, he's going to put a new battery in it. And see, if your heart fails, then you die. So all the energy is coming from the heart. Because what's in the heart that is the source of energy? The super soul. And the soul, both. But the super soul is the source of that energy that keeps us alive. But now the microphone has a new heart, a new battery, so now it's working. Go ahead.
It begins with ignorance, and there's 5 types of ignorance, as we discussed before. From ignorance comes the seeds of material desires, bijam.
Wait a minute, say that more clearly. From ignorance comes what?
Comes the seeds of material desires, bijam.
Yes. What's the name in Sanskrit?
Bijam.
Bijam, yes.
And when these seeds grow, it leads to sinful activities, papam, which again leads to sinful reactions. Sinful reactions are unmanifest first, aprarabdha, and then become manifest, prarabdha. The then tendency to sin remains called kutam. And all of these come from avidya, or ignorance.
Yes. And when the sinful reactions to sinful acts becomes manifest, it's called parabdha, and that leads to suffering, such as birth, death, old age, and disease, such as sufferings of this body, sufferings caused by other bodies, and suffering caused by natural disasters. Okay. So this is called the cycle of suffering. And your homework was? Huh? Wait a minute, speak into the microphone, I can't hear you.
Oh, our homework was to explain how to get out of the cycle of suffering. And
Anvita, did you do your homework? No, and Advait didn't do his homework. So let's do the homework now. How do you get out of the cycle of suffering? So what did I tell you? What verse should you have referred to?
4.10.
Huh? Yeah, 4.10. So let's look at it now. Chapter 4, verse number 10. Which is Vitaraga Bhaya Krula Manavam Pasyate.
Bahavo Jnana Tapasa Putamad.
Yeah. Bahavo Jnana Tapasa Putamad Bhavam Agataha. Very good. So, why don't you read? Or maybe let Anvita read. A verse and then the purport. This is how to get out of the cycle of suffering.
Being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me.
Very good.
As described above, it is the purport by Srila Prabhupada. As described above, it is very difficult for a person who is too maturely affected to understand the personal nature of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Generally, people who are attached to the bodily conception of life are so absorbed in materialism that it is almost impossible for them to understand how the Supreme can be a person. Such materialists cannot even imagine that there is a transcendental body which is imperishable, full of knowledge, and eternally blissful. In the materialistic concept, the body is perishable, full of ignorance, and completely miserable. Therefore, people in general keep the same bodily idea in the mind when they are informed of the personal form of the Lord.
So this is called in Sanskrit Atmavan Manyate Jagat. To project onto what you see your limitations. So if you have a limited body, when you see Krishna, you think he's like you. It's called Atmavan Manyate Jagat. You project your limitations on whatever you see. And that's due to false ego.
Okay.
It's due to the false ego. Go ahead.
For such materialistic men, the form of the gigantic material manifestation is supreme. Consequently, they consider the Supreme to be impersonal.
Yeah, so they think it's impossible for someone like Krishna to be God because he's like me. So therefore they think, oh, the God is the whole universe. And because it's bigger than me. I can see it physically. It's bigger than me. Go ahead. And then if you say it's the whole universe, then it's something impersonal. Go ahead.
And because they are too materially absorbed, the conception of retaining the personality after liberation from matter frightens them.
Yeah, if they're like, let's say they're 90 years old, they have diabetes, they have cardiac problems, they have problems sleeping, they have pain all over their body, and someone says, you are eternal. And it's, oh no, I don't want to be eternal. Because they think they'll go on like this with all these pains and old age eternally. They don't understand that there's such a thing as a spiritual body that's eternally knowledgeable and blissful and not subject to old age, disease, and death. They don't understand that. Again, they're just projecting themselves. And themselves, not their real self, but their false self as the body. Therefore, they say, I don't want to be eternal. I don't want to go on suffering like this. They don't understand that they have an eternal spiritual body. That's the first point of ignorance, right? To deceive yourself and to think that you're this body and not the soul in the body. Go ahead.
When they're informed that the spiritual life is also individual and personal, they become afraid of becoming persons again, so they naturally prefer a kind of merging into the impersonal void. Generally, they compare the living entities to the bubbles of the ocean, which merge into the ocean. That is the highest perfection of spiritual existence, attainable without the individual personality. This is a kind of fearful stage of life, devoid of perfect knowledge of spiritual existence.
Yeah, they give the example of the bubble of air that's coming up to the surface of the water. And when it comes to the surface of the water, it goes, and it bursts, and then merges with the air. And they think that individuality is a false thing, like the bubble of air seems to be an individual underwater, but as soon as it hits the air, it bursts and it merges with the air. So they think that their existence is like that in this body and with individuality, it's all false. and the only reality is merging into the nothingness of the Brahman, or they think it's nothingness, but no, it's not a fact. The individuality is eternal, sanatana. Go ahead.
Furthermore, there are many persons who cannot understand spiritual existence at all, being embarrassed by so many theories and by contradiction of various types of philosophical,
not philosophical.
philosophical speculation. They become disgusted or angry and foolishly conclude that there is no supreme cause and that everything is ultimately void. Such people are in a diseased condition of life. Some people are too materially attached and therefore do not give attention to spiritual life. Some of them want to merge into the supreme spiritual cause, and some of them disbelieve in everything, being angry at all sorts of spiritual speculation out of hopelessness. This last class of man take to the shelter of some kind of intoxication, and their effective hallucinations are sometimes accepted as spiritual vision. One has to get rid of all three stages of material consciousness: attachment to material life, fear of spiritual personal identity, and the conception of void that arises from frustration in life.
Did you miss one? Negligence of spiritual life?
That only three. I didn't say negligence anywhere.
This last class of men take to the shelter of some kind of intoxication, and their effective hallucinations are sometimes accepted as spiritual vision. One has to get rid of all three stages of attachment to this material world. Negligence of spiritual life. Did you miss that one?
It says attachment to material life, and the fear of spiritual personal identity, and the conception of void that arises from frustration in life.
Okay, there's a little difference in text. Go ahead.
To get free from these three stages of the material concept of life, one has to take complete shelter of the Lord, guided by the bona fide spiritual master, and follow the disciplines and regulative principles of devotional life.
Okay, so did this answer our question? How to become free of cycle of misery?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Read that again. To get free from
these three stages of the material concept of life, one has to take complete shelter of the Lord, guided by the bona fide spiritual master, and follow the disciplines and regulated principles of devotional life.
Yes.
And the last stage of devotional life is called Bhava, or transcendental love of Godhead. According to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.4.15-16, the science of devotional service. Do I read the verse?
Just read the English.
Okay. In the beginning, one must have a preliminary desire for self-realization. This will bring one to the stage of trying to associate with persons who are spiritually elevated. In the next stage, one becomes initiated by an elevated spiritual master, and under his instruction, the neophyte devotee begins a process of devotional service. By execution of devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master, one becomes free from all material attachments, attains steadiness in self-realization, and acquires a taste for hearing about the absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. This taste leads one further toward attachment for Krishna consciousness, which is matured in Bhava, or the preliminary stage of transcendental love of God. Real love of God is called Prema, the highest perfectional stage of life. In the Prema stage, there is constant engagement in the transcendental loving service of the bona fide spiritual master. One can attain the highest stage, being free from all material attachment, from the fearfulness of one's individual spiritual personality, and from the frustrations that result in the void philosophy. Then one can ultimately attain the abode of the Supreme Lord.
So Prabhupada's pranam mantra is Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutali Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine. So these two words, Nirvisesa and Sunyavadi, what do they mean? Nirvisesa means void, and I'm sorry, Nirvisesa means Mayavad philosophy, and Sunyavad means Buddhism, voidness, right? So these are two diseases that keep people in the material world, right? It says here, so by the slow process of devotional service, under the guidance of this bona fide spiritual master, one can attain this highest stage, being freed from all material attachment, from the fearfulness of one's individual spiritual personality, and from the frustrations that result in void philosophy. So, being freed from all material attachment. So material attachment is one type of philosophy that keeps you in the material world. So that's like being attached to karma kanda worship in order to get material benefits and elevation to the higher material planets. And then number two, fear of one's individual personal identity. Well, that's the Mayavadi concept. They think that the highest state is merging into the oneness of Brahman. And then fourth is frustrations that result in void philosophy. So that's Buddhism. So there's three things that people consider spiritual. Like the Hindus, they like to perform ritualistic sacrifices for material benefit, right? Satyanarayana Puja and other things like that. That'll keep you in the material world. Then the Mayavadis, they think that denying the individuality and merging into Brahman is the highest state of spiritual perfection. But that's another mistake. They fall down from Brahman realization. And the Buddhists think that denying all interactions in the material world and merging into a void is the perfection. But they'll fall down from that also. It's already fallen position. Mayavad position has fallen already, and the Buddhist position of nirvana has also fallen. Although it looks good from gross material aspect, actually it's not good. So, therefore, is this the answer to the homework question? Yes. Okay. So you would have had to have written it out. And Sidhu, did you do your homework? Huh? Oh, okay. That's almost equal to not doing it. Not exactly though, but you can bring it in to later on today and show it to me. Okay, but anyway, did you look at this verse 4:10 in Bhagavad? Very good, very good. Okay, and then next we discussed yesterday well, there were 5 points. So far we've discussed 3 of the 5 points of ignorance. The fourth point of ignorance is false ownership, or false sense of ownership. And then I gave the verse 271, Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, 71st verse, that explains the real sense of proprietorship, which is called what? Nirmama. Nothing belongs to me. Everything belongs to Krishna. That's the real sense of proprietorship. And the false sense is everything belongs to me, potentially. I am the proprietor. And that's the false sense of proprietorship. So if we understand that everything belongs to Krishna, then real knowledge is how to use everything in Krishna's service. So what is real knowledge, Advait? Huh?
Real knowledge is
how is this possible? You're sitting here, I just said the answer, and you say, huh? Okay, you know what the question is? What is it? Exactly. And what is real knowledge? Sidhu? I just said it. Were you listening? No. Okay. You were talking. Anvita? Huh? You were not listening? Okay. So, real knowledge is, if you understand that everything belongs to Krishna, then real knowledge is learning how to use everything correctly in Krishna's service. Write it down. Real knowledge. If you know that you need a pencil, that everything belongs to Krishna, then if you know that everything belongs to Krishna, Bhuktaram Yagatapasam, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, right? Then real knowledge is knowing how to use everything correctly in the service of Krishna. If you do this, you overcome the fourth point of ignorance, and that is false sense of proprietorship. Okay? And then the fifth point of ignorance created by Brahma is, anybody know? Yes. The fifth point is developing the material conception of life. And what is that? Aham mameti. Thinking that I am it ultimately translates into thinking that I am the servant of my family, my friends, my nation, my society, of everything else except Krishna. I'm not the servant of Krishna, but I'm the servant of my community, I'm the servant of my nation, I'm the servant of my family, I'm a servant of the whole universe, but not Krishna. Right? So it is also believing that my purpose is sense gratification from my own selfish indulgence, and for my family, my ethnic brothers, my country, etc. So we said yesterday that all wars are wars of what? Yes. So I gave the example of Israel. The Israelis they want a particular type of sense gratification that's called the Jewish culture, and the Palestinians want a different type of sense gratification called Palestinian sense gratification, but they both want to do it in the same place called Israel. So therefore there's a war. One wants sense gratification this way, the other one wants sense gratification another way, and they're fighting over the land where they can have that that particular type of sense gratification. So all wars are wars for sense gratification. Like North Korea wants to have sense gratification in a certain way, and South Korea wants to have sense gratification another way, and so forth. Hitler wanted sense gratification for his people in a certain way, and the Allies wanted another type of sense gratification in another way. So they fought a war. ISIS wants sense gratification in a certain way, and the people opposed to ISIS want sense gratification in another way. The Muslims in Kashmir want sense gratification in their way, and Hindus want it in another way. So there's war, but the purpose is sense gratification. Okay. So we quoted a verse explaining what is happiness in the mode of passion. What is happiness in the mode of passion? How does it begin? How does it end? Sidhu. How does What is happiness in the mode of passion? How does it begin and how does it end? Yes. Rajaguna.
Look at the notes. Look at the notes.
Point out where it is so we can see.
That happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion.
So how does it begin? How does it end?
It begins as nectar and ends at poison.
It turns into poison. Right.
Yeah, like this is the elixir. Yeah.
So we read the purport to that verse. Vishayendriya samyogad yattad agre amritopamam pariname visham iva tat sukham rajasam smritam. What begins as nectar and ends up as poison is happiness in the mode of passion. You have any examples? Go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, family went to Disneyland. It was for their kids, and when they entered, it was nectar. But after 2 days, they were leaving, and the kids threw a temper tantrum. In other words, they went into a fit of anger. They didn't want to leave. Or they were forced to leave. That's why they were crying and angry. Or Friday night, you mean? Instead of being in the kirtan, they were playing. And one of them got hurt, and he started... Yeah. So what began like nectar, leaving the kirtan, the kids' kirtan, and going outside and doing nonsense play, and then one got hurt, and he was crying and really upset. Right? So it began like nectar, leaving the kirtan and going outside and playing. And it ended up like poison. Okay. So then we discussed the 20 points of knowledge, but not in detail. And then we began to discuss what are the 8 symptoms of a liberated person. 8 symptoms of a liberated person. And the first one is a liberated person is free of all sinful activities. And what are the 4 major categories of sinful activities? Anvita, you know that. What are the 4 pillars of sinful activities? Wait a minute, your name is not Anvita. Yes. 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 Very good. So a liberated person is free from those 4 types of sinful activities, which encompass all types of sinful activities. And then secondly, a liberated person is not subject to the miseries of old age, and such as failing eyesight and different types of sicknesses and weakness and so forth. And then the third point, a liberated person does not act in a way that he'll be obliged to have a material body in the next life. That is, he or she doesn't engage in sense gratification beyond what is permitted by the Shastra. And rather they use the senses and the mind in the service of Krishna. And number 4, a liberated person is not affected by the dualities of life. What does that mean, dualities of life? Huh? Yes, Sidhu. No. What are the dualities of life, Advait? Happiness and distress. Yes. What else? Sidhu? Name another duality of life. What? What? Happiness and distress, then heat and cold, right? Then riches and poverty, and success and failure. Huh? There are a lot of dualities, yeah. So a liberated person is not affected by these dualities, right? And then, number 5, a liberated person no longer desires material sense gratification or material enjoyments. He's satisfied with spiritual bliss. And then next, the liberated person only desires to be engaged in devotional service of Krishna. And next, liberated person wants his devotional service to be pleasing to Krishna. Therefore, he learns how to please Krishna. Where can you learn how to please Krishna? Yes, Amida? In association of sincere devotees, yeah. But who's the greatest devotee of Krishna? Srimati? Yes. So we ultimately learn how to please Krishna from Srimati Radharani. And then, the last point, a symptom of a liberated person is that his or her spiritual desires are fulfilled by the mercy of Krishna. Just like Prabhupada wanted to print bona fide books about Krishna and distribute them all over the world. Did this happen? Yes. It's a miracle how it happened. Then Prabhupada wanted to open temples all over the world. He came to America with no money at all, no friends, no disciples. Was he able to build temples all over the world? Yes. So, the spiritual desires of a pure devotee are fulfilled by the mercy of Krishna. So, but if we remain in the cycle of suffering due to the 5 conditions of ignorance, and we don't try to overcome them, then it leads to unnecessary suffering. In other words, all suffering is actually unnecessary. It only happens because we become subject to these 5 types of ignorance. So today, I wanted to discuss, and we don't have much time, but we'll just start, something, a very interesting topic related to this, and that is, if I can find it, chapter 9 of Canto 9 of Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm sorry, Canto 7, chapter 9. Prahlad Maharaj is praying to Lord Nrsingadev after Lord Nrsingadev killed his father. And he says that by engaging in your devotional service, O Lord, in the association of devotees who are liberated souls, I shall become completely uncontaminated by the association of the 3 modes of nature, and I'll be able to chant your glories always, because you're so dear to me. I will chant your glories, following exactly in the footsteps of Lord Brahma and his disciplic succession called the Brahma Sampradaya. In this way, I shall undoubtedly be able to cross the ocean of ignorance. The ocean of ignorance means these 5 principles of ignorance. So, this is an explanation of a devotee's life. If you want to know what the life of a devotee is, this is it right here. As soon as a devotee chants Hare Krishna, Mahamantra, and chants the glories of the Lord by repeating Bhagavad Gita, by repeating prayers of great devotees like Prahlad Maharaj, like this prayer, he or she attains a liberated position. So by becoming attached to glorifying the Lord by hearing and chanting his holy names and his activities, this is called what in Sanskrit? Shravanam, Vishnu Smaranam. Yeah. Hearing and chanting, which leads to remembering the Lord constantly. It liberates a devotee from all material contamination. This is the secret. So what is the secret to being liberated? Sidhu. Huh?
What's the question?
Okay, Advait, tell him what the question is.
What's the secret to attain liberation?
Got the question?
Chanting.
What?
Chanting.
Chanting and?
9 process of devotional service.
Huh?
Process of devotional service.
Which are?
Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam,
Archanam, Vandanam, yes.
Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmani Vendadam.
Very good. Hearing, chanting, remembering the Lord, serving the lotus feet, worshiping the Lord, praying to the Lord, becoming friends, establishing friendship with the Lord, and surrendering everything to the Lord, right? So that is the way to attain the liberated position. When you're liberated, you're no longer interested in sense gratification, you're only interested in pleasing Krishna, and so forth, as we explained the 8 symptoms of a liberated person. Okay. Okay, so we learn how to be liberated by following in the example of our acharyas. And who's our immediate acharya? Srila Prabhupada. Yeah. So how did he start the Hare Krishna movement? No, he started by chanting Hare Krishna. By doing Sankirtan in Tompkins Square. Did you see the movie? Where? How did he start? Yes, he started by chanting Hare Krishna in Tompkins Square, New York. Okay. So we should follow Prabhupada's example. So you did, right? Were you on Sankirtan yesterday, Siddhar? Yeah, you were there. Advait was there. Anvita was. Were you there yesterday, Siddhar? Yeah. So we all chanted and danced and distributed books, and we were engaged in Krishna's service. Can you free yourself from the miseries of life simply by, let's say, working in Microsoft? No. So, but most people are trying to solve the problem of suffering by working hard and making money. Can you actually become free of suffering by working hard and making money? No. Can you become free of suffering by doing a lot of pujas and then at the end of life you're elevated to the higher material planets? No. You just changed your position from a third-class prisoner to a first-class prisoner, but you're still a prisoner. Is there birth, death, old age, and disease even on Brahmaloka? Yes. Yeah, even though they live a very long time, but they have to suffer those things too. Okay, so we will stop right there. Yes.
Microphone.
Yeah, they're everywhere in the universe. Everywhere in the universe.
Microphone.
Yeah, it's just not as severe as here, or here it's not as severe as it is in the lower planets. I mean, it's very little, but it's still present. You can't free yourself from these 4 things in the material world. It's just they're everywhere present. But it's, like I said, it's not as severe as other places. There's very little of it. Okay, so we'll stop there. So we covered chapter Canto 7, Chapter 9, verse 18. And we'll continue next week. Okay, so homework for next week. Read Canto 7, Chapter 9, verse number 18.
I read the whole.
Huh?
Yeah, right.
I did.
Okay, but read it again, Sidhu. And write
Which chapter?
9, 7, 18.
7, 9, 18.
I'm sorry, 7, 9, 18. And explain
7, 9, 18.
explain how to be liberated from the cycle of
Microphone.
misery.
On microphone.
Mike,
Explain how to be liberated from the cycle of misery. Okay? So basically it's the same question as you had for today, but you have another point of view from reading 7, 9, 18. You going to do your homework, Sidhu?
Yeah.
Okay. Do it today so you don't have to do it at the last minute next week. Okay? 7, 9, 18. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada
Welcome back
ki
from
jai.
our character series.
What?